So look, I don't want to in any way sound ageist, but the geezers in today's movie are pretty hardcore. Howdy. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. Folks, we have a great lineup for today's film, The Old Guard, and it includes comics books creator Greg Rucka, and it's also his debut screenplay made into a feature film, so that's pretty cool as well, and the film's director, Gina Prince-Bythewood. So, look, they make a great team, as you're about to see. And this movie is really well written, and it's an entertaining action movie that I wish was for all ages. I guess that's my only complaint. It's so violent that it had to be made rated R. And that was the one question I didn't get a chance to ask them. Could there ever have been a PG-13 version of this? I don't know. I think if you eliminate some of the headshot kills that are gory, maybe, but I understand why it's R-rated, and I do appreciate the world having a place for R-rated comic book movies. But Gina and Greg were a great interview and had a lot of very interesting things to say about making this film that I highly recommend you watch, because you can watch it right now. It's in your pocket probably. It's on Netflix. So make sure to check out The Old Guard and then listen to our episode, because you're really going to enjoy it. And speaking of things to dig, I hope while you're surfing around online, you check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You know, it's a strange time without movies in theaters, but we are still working forward on publishing issue 42, if you could believe it, our 42nd issue, and it's going to have a great quarantine read for you. If you subscribe, you could read all of our archive, which goes back about a year and a half, and we're adding stuff further back in time to it. And you'll get the ability to read anything new that we publish. So you'll be in place when issue 42 finally comes out, and your support would mean everything to us. As a reward to you for supporting us, of course, I encourage you to use coupon code SAVE5. It'll save you $5 off your subscription over at backstory.net. You could use it in the checkout cart when you're checking out. It won't work in the iPad. It'll only work at backstory.net. But don't worry, if you really want to use our iPad app, you could get your subscription at backstory.net and then use those credentials to log in on an iPad. So you are all set. Also, if you've never read us, I encourage you to do so. You could read issue 37, our Avengers Endgame issue. It's completely free, so you could test drive us and you could see what we're all about. So your support means everything, and I would greatly appreciate it. Obviously, if you're seeing this podcast for the first time on YouTube, it's kind of new for us to be on YouTube at the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, but you could also find a ton of other interviews at the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast via iTunes or Spotify. So it's kind of weird being in three places at once, but kind of cool. And it's something new that we've adapted to during these strange pandemic times. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our conversation with comic book creator and screenwriter Greg Rucka and director Gina Prince-Bythewood about their feature film, The Old Guard. Gina, Greg, it's great to have you guys with us, and I absolutely love The Old Guard. So congrats on a great comic book adaptation, both of you.
I hear that. Love it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's always fun to start with breaking in stories. So just kind of like really kind of the first time you got paid for it. So Gina, I know you come from TV as your earliest work. And A Different World was kind of where you got your start as a writer. Mm-hmm. And tell me what was the biggest eye-opening part of that experience that helped you learn your craft?
Mm-hmm. I was blessed that was my first job. I got it right out of college, right out of film school. It was my favorite show. So to be able to go from, watching Dwayne and Whitley to suddenly writing for Dwayne and Whitley was pretty amazing. It was run by Black women, Susan Fales Hill, Debbie Allen, Yvette Lee Bowser. So on my first job in Hollywood, every day I'm going to that environment, and that was my normal, which absolutely I know influenced me. And most importantly, a young man named Reggie Rock Bythewood was hired a week after I was, and we clicked immediately and became best friends, and 6 years later got married. So it was a very influential experience. I learned so much. I think the best lesson I learned is the grind. Yvette Lee Bowser took me under her wing and really taught me the way for longevity is to make yourself invaluable. And so that means being first there, doing all-nighters to make sure that your work, is at the level that it needs to be. And I've kept that mentality throughout my career. And it absolutely started there. Put in the work, put in the grind, make yourself invaluable.
That's awesome. Greg, you've been a comic book writer, and this marks your first feature film adaptation as a screenwriter. Able to adapt your own work, which I think is awesome. And by the way, I know I was looking on your IMDb, you were involved with Siphon Filter, the video game, Logan's Shadow, and I played the hell out of that, man, back in the day. Thank you for actually a really good story. That was actually a really good story.
That was my job, was the story on that. Yeah.
But we're going to talk the whole time about what you've learned on this process. But I think the easiest place to really get into it today is tell us about how the seed of the idea for The Old Guard as a comic book began. I know it's the most over-asked question, but we got to set a baseline.
Well, I mean, the problem with that is that there are like 7 different answers. Part of it comes out of, a role-playing game group that I was in the 90s, and a story run by my wife, and it was like, and the mythology of soldiers who don't die, that's a cultural ghost story that's global, right? There's a song by Stan Ridgway called Camouflage that is absolutely part of this. There is a character sketch that I have for, the woman who becomes Andy that I found. I found a document that I'd written in early 2013 that was effectively Andy before I had named her. So it comes from a whole bunch of places, and then it catalyzes when these things collide. And that's probably the result of my father passing and me not wanting to directly interrogate that. So trying to come at it from the side,
That's interesting. And you said it was from a document in 2013. Do you do that sometimes? Do a lot of writers kind of have drawers of ideas? Do you just kind of go back through old ideas to see what you could mine?
No, I have a whole bunch of half-finished notebooks all over, and every now and then I'll rediscover them and be like, oh, there was a reason I abandoned that idea. Most of the time, if the idea has some legs, it'll stay with me. We started working on The Old Guard as a comic in 2014. I mean, I have sketches that Leo did in early 2014. So it took from this concept of this character to the idea to actually then finding the story, that in and of itself was a journey. I don't know. I mean, for me, the ideas and the stories come from any number of places, but they tend to cook for a while. And then when they're ready, they're ready. They're impatient. So.
Just getting to the film, at what point did you find yourself being approached for the film rights, and how were you able to stay involved as a screenwriter? Because it's so rare that comic book creators stay the screenwriter.
Yeah, it's called a contract. I think the first issue had come out. We had like 4 of the 5 completed, and Skydance called, and I had another couple calls around it, but Skydance was very passionate and very engaged. And when it came time to make the deal, I asserted I wanted to write the draft. Because Hollywood works on the basis of writers are like socks. So the worst thing that was going to happen was the check would be slightly larger that they would have to write. They would get a draft and a second draft and a polish, and that was all they were obligated to. And at that point, they could cheerfully fire me. And at that point, I would somewhat cheerfully admit to being fired, right, if I hadn't been able to do the job. Mind you, that took 20 years to get to a place where, 1, I was willing to assert it, and that 2, when the opportunity came, I felt that I could actually fulfill it, but I think it was the second draft that was given to Gina. And then when Gina came aboard, it was like, because before I met Gina, I was like, oh, they got a director, so I may be out. Right. And instead Gina comes in with like a notebook and a laptop and the trade And within 3 minutes of "It's very nice to meet you," she's asking, "Why is this in the script? But this was in the comic. You didn't do this in the screenplay." And and from that point on, it was like, oh, I guess I get to work with you. Well, this is awesome. So yeah,
and we'll get to that. We'll get to that in the non-spoiler section in the spoiler section in a couple of minutes. But Gina, what's great about this for you is that it kind of unboxed you career-wise, and I hate seeing artists boxed in. And this big action movie, you had done Cloak and Dagger, you had directed an episode of Cloak and Dagger, so you had the chops, obviously, because you're a veteran director anyhow. But Hollywood tends to keep people in boxes and zones and not let them kind of explore and expand. So what was it like for you to pitch on this job? How did you wind up becoming involved with it?
Mm-hmm. And I'll just correct one thing you said. They put women in boxes. They don't put those limits on male directors, just to be real. I was absolutely, it started with putting it out into the ether that I wanted to do an action film. I love them. I see them all. I have 2 boys, a husband. It's a family thing that we do. And as I saw the way that they were evolving over the last couple of years and becoming action dramas, I really loved it. I love Logan. I love Black Panther.
So great.
The way that they have all the things you love in the genre, yet I cried in both of those because the depth of character was so well done. I love that they were bringing in different types of directors to bring their aesthetic to the genre. And I wanted my turn, to be honest. And so I started making steps to get into the conversation. And it started with directing the pilot of Marvel's Cloak and Dagger. And that certainly got me then into meetings and, then Silver and Black, which I was on for 1.5 years, and that didn't go. But what I learned there was invaluable, absolutely. But just as I was kind of fading from that, this script came. And I was not familiar with the comic, but I was familiar with Greg's work because one of the things I looked at when I was working on Silver and Black was Lazarus. And so
I didn't know that.
I know, that's the first time I've ever said it.
That's cool.
And I was so blown away by the work, and so much I was like, I kind of want to do this. But I loved his female characters, and here I'm reading the script by him and I'm getting that same great feeling. And I just loved everything about it. And what was so beautiful, though, is once I knew I wanted to do it, Skydance, in having me come in, one of the first things they said in the meeting was it was my work in Love and Basketball and Beyond the Lights that got me in the room, because they wanted that type of character development and depth of story in the old guard. And so for the first time, instead of me being told you can't get in the room because you have no action experience, I was in the room because of my prior work. And so that, it was just a great environment. They were intent on having a female director. I was so passionate about the material. And then, of course, once I got in the room, I talked about how I was going to shoot the action. But it was great. And I have to say, one of the coolest moments as well is, when they told me that once I got the gig, they told me Greg's reaction. And, I hadn't met Greg yet. Now it all makes sense. But they told me how excited he was about me doing it. And I believe, Greg, you sent me an email, and that just blew me away. One, that you were familiar with my work, and that you saw that, again, that I was an asset to this, as opposed to, can she really do this? So it was just a great environment to be in.
You have a long history of rich character development in your work. So, I mean, you're a perfect choice, and you really knocked it out of the park. Before we get into deeper elements here, I just want to, for a moment, listen, because Hollywood's having a critical moment at this time where the voices of people of color are being listened to and amplified. And I'm just curious, moving forward, we've had different programs in place for years. We've had diversity programs. There's been inclusion casting has been on the rise as well. But what do you think are some important things going forward that people should be more aware of?
What they have, God, it's such a long list. But
Yeah.
we'll just focus on a couple. Foremost, you need people of color in the room, and not just one, because when you have just one, you think, oh, I filled my quota. Yet we are not a monolith. We have different thoughts about things as well. So, but it's so important to have someone in the room to call out things that you may not get if you are not of that culture or that environment. And it's so obvious to me, things that I have seen in scripts that just don't make sense. And if you had a Black person in the room, you would say, I'm not going to call out the film, but a film I saw, and it's a film that I love, except for one big element. Like, why does this one Black character in the film, they have no Black friends. They don't have, didn't have a Black boyfriend. She had no family. It was like she was on this island. Like, they just decided, hey, let's cast her Black. But that's all well and good. Yet then do your homework and let her culture be a part of who she is. That's what makes it authentic and truthful. But when you have nobody in the room, it's not enough to just paper your film with different cultures. Like, let them be who they are. So that's foremost. And when you have people in the room, they call out stuff like that. And then give more filmmakers of color the opportunity to tell our stories and tell them authentically and truthfully, so that our images are not always coming from someone else's lens. And that is, according to the statistics of 2019, 80% of films, and I put Greg outside of that because Greg is special, but white men.
But I'm a white guy. I mean, I'm a middle-class white guy. I benefit enormously from my privilege, and I'm aware of it. And, that is something that I bring to my writing, is I try to be aware of where I am and the things I don't know.
I think what's great about The Old Guard is that it's also an example of a movie that has, a diverse cast, has, Gina as director, but it's not an issue movie. And that's the place that we've always been trying to get to, in which there is also a boxing in sometimes of people of color to only do people of color issue movies. But unboxing that again is great. So
I wanted to say, because I think Gina, what Gina's absolutely right, is you can't put one Black person in your writer's room and then lay on them the burden of speaking for all people of color. It is a horrible position to put anybody in, right? To say your voice is now the voice for everyone. There is, you are expected to be, and it's dishonest of our world, right? I mean, and one of the things that I am just unrepentantly proud about this movie is that there's a lot of deep stuff in this film. But this film, as much as it is, a fairy tale of blood and bullets, is reflective of our world.
Yep.
It looks like our world, except for the part where the dead people get up again. It looks like our world.
It's just that little thing.
Yeah, but that's so important to so many people, and it's important to the people who have always been represented. I think it's important to white people to see that. You know what I mean? Because
absolutely,
it's at the least it forces an acknowledgement that, oh, right, it's kind of a big world.
I want to jump into the writing because I know we're on a time limit, but I'm since you're both writers, I'm going to give you kind of like some lightning quick questions here about your habits. How important is outlining to your process for both of you? Obviously, Greg, starting with you, but I want to hear Gina's view on it too.
It depends on the project. It really depends on the project.
How important was it for The Old Guard? I mean, obviously you'd already written it once, so I had an outline
into it. Yeah. So to do the screenplay was, in that sense, structurally not a problem because I had the structure already. The comic, I didn't know in truth what I was writing about until I got to the second to last issue of the comic. Up
really?
Until that point, yeah, because, well, look, any writer is going to, any writer who tells you I am writing this story about this thing, it may be about the thing that they say it is, but I guarantee you that 70% of the way through the process or so, they're going to be like, oh, I'm writing about something else entirely as well, right? There are other things at work. So it really wasn't until I realized this is a spoiler, but it really wasn't until I realized, it's Booker, that the whole thing crystallized for me. And I didn't know it was Booker until I was done with issue 3.
Wow.
I was over the hump on that. I remember having a conversation with Alejandro Arbona, our editor, and me having to explain to him, like, I think it's Booker, and I think this is why, and him actually being like, I'm not sure about that.
We'll get into that more in the spoiler section. Gina, outlining for you, is it an important part of your process?
It used to be. It's not anymore.
Interesting.
And I'm not necessarily advocating for it. I get impatient because I just want to start writing. But what I do is have at least I write to turning points, which keeps me writing forward and pushing the story forward. So, I know each turning point, and it also distills it so I don't feel like I'm writing 120 pages. Oh, I just have to write 15 pages to get to this point and this point. So, but I spend so much time thinking before I even start writing, like months of just sitting in this chair here with a notebook and just jotting ideas down. So by the time it's come to writing, I feel like I've thought through it so deeply.
I've interviewed a lot of writers and they have similar habits, obviously, but the one thing that always seems to stump everybody a little is how you collate those notes. When you have a journal filled with notes, how difficult is it for you to go back and find the right ones that you want to incorporate? Do you just spend a lot of time rereading your notes?
I think once I decide, okay, I'm ready to write, I go back and read. And it's amazing because oftentimes it's those first thoughts that I go back to because they were the most raw and honest and kind of what I really want to pull out of myself. So certainly, yeah, I love reading it that one time, but then I don't really go back to it again because it's so distilled in my head. So it's that, and then creating my soundtrack because I have to write to music. So I create a soundtrack for every script. And then I have my big jar of Junior Mints, which are my little treats after I finish scenes and I start writing.
You should get a playlist up on Spotify or something. That sounds amazing. Gina, starting with you and then going to Greg, how do you give yourself a daily hours, like a certain amount of hours you want to write, or a page count that you need to hit?
I do page count. Yeah, the hours thing, I have 2 kids.
How many pages do you try and hit?
I think I do. It changes. It definitely changes with each project. I feel like I do 8 pages.
Okay. Greg?
Depends on the medium. If I'm writing in prose, there's a word count, not a page count. And that'll be 3,000 to 5,000 words a day.
Wow.
If it's a screenplay, it tends to be, I tend to work through sequences. So depending on the sequence, because sometimes it is really slow. So I try to get through, 2 to 3, and that will probably come out to between 5 and 10 pages. And then for comic scripting, it's all over the map. I shoot for 6-page increments, but if I can get to 10 or 12, I'll take it. I'm very aware of hitting a point of diminishing returns. And there's no fun in that. And writing for me just isn't fun anyway. It's just the thing that I know how to do.
You do it well, sir. You do it well.
Well, thank you.
So. What was your budget and schedule? Just as kind of we're wrapping out our non-spoiler questions.
That's also spoiler. I can't tell you the budget. It was a lot.
Okay, schedule
63 days.
Okay. That's great. And, Gina, one last non-spoiler question for you. Pre-production is really a director's realm so that you're prepared for being on set. Obviously, you're working out stunts, special effects. What was something really important in pre-production for the Old Guard?
The training for the actors. Knowing that I wanted this film to feel grounded and real, that had to permeate every aspect. And most importantly, the action and the stunts. I wanted to make sure that we could tell the story with each set piece, that had the beginning, middle, and end, that it was character driven, that there was emotion to it. And the best way to do that is to have the actors really do it. So, I was very upfront with everybody at the outset. You are doing your stuff, but they were all game across the board, and they put in the work. It was months of training, but specifically talking to Kiki, who had never done this before, all that training is your rehearsal. You are building Nile. You are building that character. You are building this Marine and this warrior. But that was so wholly important. And I didn't know 100% until that first day on set when we started shooting the plane fight, which was the first thing we shot, whether all that training was going to show up on screen. And the minute Kiki threw that first punch and I saw the intent behind it, I knew that we were good.
Did it allow you to go over dramatic scenes as well during those training months, because you would have some extra drama rehearsal time beyond just fights and stunts?
It's really interesting. On this film, the biggest film that had the longest shoot, I had the least amount of actual rehearsal time, except for the training. But what was beautiful about this is I wanted great actors for every role, and I got great actors for every role, which allowed me to have a little less. But all of our sessions, so to speak, were so much about just talking about character and talking about the scene as opposed to going through the lines. And that is invaluable in terms of the other actors helping to build their characters, understand what the scenes are about. And that's the fun part, because you want to leave some freshness once you get on set. You want those lines to feel brand new. So I tend to only focus on what something is about as opposed to getting so specific until we're on set.
That makes sense. All right. People that are watching this on YouTube at the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, or our podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify, press pause if you have not seen the movie, because we are getting into the spoilers. We're going to discuss in detail the spoilers.
And go see the movie.
And that's what I was going to say. Go see the movie on Netflix. It's probably... The movie is probably already in your pocket right now. So go see the movie and come back and listen to the rest of the interview. I think one of the things that was deviating a bit from the comic that was interesting here, because it upped the stakes, is the concept of Andy starting to lose her immortality and becoming mortal, and kind of this concept that maybe as that's happening to her, it's because of Niles getting her powers. At what point did that idea come along? Because it's a cool idea and it ups the stakes for the character.
It came in. I want to say it was after sort of, I guess, the final second draft. It gets very hard for me to track at what point what is what, right? Sure. Because the process is an ongoing editorial process. You are always interrogating the material, even when you're on set. And even when you're setting up for the shot, you're interrogating the material, going, is this the best way, right? Is this the best line? And it was one of those ideas that I wish I had thought of when I was doing the comic, because it is so beautifully visual, and it becomes it is the perfect... It's the perfect demonstration of the character's problem, right? It literally externalizes the character's internal problem. You want to die? Okay. I mean, quite literally, now everything she's dealing with, she has to confront. And in the mythology that we're playing with, and sort of the higher gaming field of the stories, it's a beautiful... I was watching it with some fans. We have a Discord, and we were watching the movie this weekend. And Andy's scene where she says, "That's it, I'm done. The world can burn for all I care. I quit." Right? And then you go, cut, Afghanistan, meet Niall Freeman. And it's literally Gina as the god of the story going, "Oh, you think so, do you?" And that's that's the same thing you get out of Andy having to question everything. and she has to question everything because this one truth changes for her.
Yeah. So. I think it's a great element, and it really keeps the stakes going even higher, and it was a great addition. Was there ever any consideration of adding in Andy's love interest, Achilles, the freed slave who fought for the British?
Yeah, I mean, he was in the draft that I read. Absolutely. I think it's a beautiful relationship within the graphic novel. Just as we were talking about and developing it, there was the thought, which was interesting, which was elevating Quinn's character, and kind of the fact that then you've got Andy and Niall, but also this female as well, who you don't know is she a good guy or a bad guy? To have all of those female elements in it, and that character was right there. And it was just about elevating her, and she's such a fascinating character. I know I want to know all about her and her psyche at this point, having drowned for 500 years. So it really was kind of that thought process of there's so much in the graphic novel that we want to use, but we have to be judicious because we've got 2 hours. So it felt like it helped us focus the story in terms of what Andy was pining for.
It's very much a streamlining. I mean, that's what it is. Because the original draft, I think that Gina read not only had the Achilles stuff, it had the Joe and Nikki flashback, and it had a much longer Booker flashback. Like that material was in there. And I think that on an editorial level, Achilles is not removed from Andy's backstory, right? The telltale painting is in the mind. But to have removed it from the narrative of the movie allowed the movie. There's a lot of stuff to jump around with. And if you are going to, in the middle of it now, jump back over and over again, it is important to the character, but and I don't think anybody was dismissing it. It's more an issue of going, there's this amount of time and this story to tell.
I could see it as a tough choice. I mean, and you used your time wisely. You were talking about it a second ago, the Quinn flashback. I mean, flashback storytelling, it's always difficult because it's an exposition dump technically. Mm-hmm. So the things that you want to do is make sure that you're not boring your audience, and that you're telling it in an interesting way. And it's just like it magnifies everything about the movie so brilliantly and gives you this really rich story that was just presented in such a quick flash. I thought it was really interesting at the point in the movie that it came. I could have seen it being kind of modular at what point we got that flashback for her. Did it always land at that point?
You're talking about the initial Quinn, the Quinn revelation story?
Yeah, and her being put in the Iron Maiden.
It wasn't always all together. It was at one point, different moments were sprinkled, but it did become obvious in editing. Like let Andy, let Nikki, let Joe, let Booker tell this story, and let us as an audience hear the story of Quinn as one thing. And what I love about it so much also is so much of the story has no dialogue except for that little piece between the two women for a moment. It doesn't have dialogue. It just has voiceover. And I feel like it allows an audience to lean in even more. And then honestly, it was, the Iron Maiden being trapped in there is my worst nightmare. I'm claustrophobic. So that was all Gina. That had not been in the script. And then she came, during production, and she said, "We have designed this thing." And I'm sitting there going, actually, I don't think the Iron Maiden's around until 18th. And she's like, shut up. We're going to do this.
Because she was just swept overboard.
I did find one that was time appropriate.
Well, and certainly you can argue that a metal coffin was around that could have been ornate. So,
yes. But she was swept overboard in the comic, and this actually was a great addition, and it really it haunts the character for the rest of the movie.
Absolutely.
I think the exclusion of Achilles and the introduction of Quinn there keeps her haunted and very focused.
It does something else too, because like Gina was saying, there was a period where the information had been parceled out, and as it's parceled out, it plays differently. It plays as a tension, right? Because it asks the audience going, how does this get answered? And by putting it all together in the rectory scene, it actually makes it this really powerful connective moment between Niall and Andy, as well as serving to fill in that history. And I thought that was, I just thought it was a great choice.
But also, I would say this is the amazing thing about production is the whole thing started with, there's no way we can afford a ship in the middle of the ocean with Quinn falling off. So what can we do differently, but still evoke everything we need emotionally from it? And that's where it's beautiful to, Greg was on set with me. I wanted him there because he knows these characters and the story better than anybody. It's such an incredible gift. And that was just brainstorming, figuring out what can we do differently to tell the story.
Comic book movies always have set pieces, millions of dollars are spent on them. My favorite set piece in this movie, and by the way, I love the whole movie, but it's clearly Joe and Nikki in the armored van. You don't need any special effects.
Yeah.
It's somebody making who's that, your boyfriend joke, and you're like, oh my God. And then he just busts into this great monologue and they kiss to the point that the guards are so disturbed they have to split them up, but it's a monologue of true love and you can never understand what he means to me. Talk about just constructing that and obviously also filming it, Gina, because it was a great moment. It was a showstopper.
All right. Well, Greg, why don't you talk about construction and then I'll talk about shooting.
Well, I mean, it was in the comic, and I wanted, one of the thesis elements is that, look, if you're around for, I don't care, certainly if you are 500 years old, your tolerance for intolerance, for prejudice and bigotry is just gone. It's just gone. You will have, if you have been out there doing what you are supposed to do, i.e. living, then you have been confronted too many times by, wow, my preconceived notions of whatever are totally wrong about people. So the most telling line for me in that is actually the very first thing that Joe says, right? Which is, you're a child, an infant, and your mocking is thus infantile. Which I just love as a takedown. And so, yeah, it mattered to me. And it mattered to me if I was going to have two queer characters in love, I wasn't going to hide it. And neither were they. I don't care if you think it's appropriate or not. They're going to be around when you're gone. So they and that,
Gina on shooting,
that was what I gave Gina.
Yeah. I mean, I love the scene in the script. The actors, Marwan and Luca, were looking forward to shooting that scene. It just meant so much to their characters. And we were in a real armored car. There was no flying wall. So how am I going to shoot this in this confined space? But I wanted us to feel that. And it was 13 takes because, we wanted to get it right. And it's amazing because both Marwan and I knew the moment that he nailed it, because I knew I wanted to hold as much as I could in one take, and that is all one take. And then to get a call from my editor the next morning after she just watched the dailies and was like, "Oh my God," and said the exact take that Marwan and I wanted. It was a really beautiful moment, and the best part about it is that after we finished shooting, two different crew members came up to me, two guys who said, I'm watching it and I'm not even thinking it's two men. I'm just seeing two people in love. And they were struck by that. And that's what I love so much about it, because it feels like it breaks through something and you just see two people, these soulmates in love.
It was a beautiful moment. Oh, hello. I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine if you never have before. You could test drive us at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop, or you could use the iPad app for Backstory, and you could read our Avengers Endgame issue completely for free. So you could really get a sense of who we are and what we do. And during these strange pandemic times, your support means everything. So if you want to subscribe to us, which means you'll get access to our archive going back a full year plus, and we're always adding new stuff to it, and to our newest issue, which we're working on now, issue 42, you could use coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5 at backstory.net at the checkout cart. It'll only work there. It won't work on an iPad. So you could log in there and do your subscription there, and then you could use your credentials on an iPad. So fear not, you'll still be able to read us on an iPad if you subscribe at backstory.net. But nonetheless, your support would mean everything to us. We would love to have you. But now I'm going to jump right back into our interview with Greg Rucka and Gina Prince-Bythewood about their awesome feature film, The Old Guard. You know, one of the other interesting things that was kind of different from the comic was the construction of the antagonist. You know, here he's a kind of pharma CEO guy that couldn't hold a weapon to probably save his life. Everyone else has to do the fighting. And in the comic, we're used to more muscular characters, but it was interesting because it was kind of like we've seen it before, but it was another New World take of the dangers of the CEO class that have no care, no feelings whatsoever about the lives that they destroy. What were kind of some of the conversations about that as an antagonist?
Well, Greg wrote it in the stage direction, and I ran with it. He described him as, reminiscent of Martin Shkreli, and that was such a perfect template. That dude is soulless, and you see his desperation of wanting to be somebody. And he is young and he is brilliant, but he's using his talents in such a wrong way. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg was another template, and it just felt very of the moment. Because pharma they've always been an issue, yet the people involved are getting younger and younger, and it's absolutely affecting the way that they think about the fact that you are here providing life-saving elements, yet you're forcing people to pay for those. There is such a moral quandary within the entire thing. So it really was about real world templates.
Right. I mean, we're hearing that already with the pandemic, in which some of the drugs that have shown some success are going to be costing more in America than they will in other countries.
And have been purchased for profit. Let's talk about insulin prices skyrocketing.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And the other thing that's at work here is we absolutely I'll tell you, the least fictional thing in this movie is a billionaire CEO trying to acquire immortality. This is something that is happening right now.
Yeah.
This is a project being pursued by several of these people who have more money than anybody would ever need for 100 generations.
But Greg, what made you go in the different direction and change him for the movie when you sat down to write it?
In what, I'm not sure I see what way you see it.
I thought he was kind of, I remember him as being kind of stronger and
Merrick
push-ups.
Because that's vanity. That's not strength.
Okay.
Right. I mean, in the comic, the depiction is of a guy who thinks that, let's put it this way. There's a class of person who exercises just so they get to take off their clothes in front of a girl at night.
For vanity. Okay, that makes sense. I was using the image because this guy looks like he would blow over when the wind blows.
He doesn't throw a punch in the comic.
Yeah, you're right.
Merrick never, ever throws a punch. And when he's confronted by needing to defend himself, he's found cowering in a bathtub.
Yeah.
So I actually don't see a difference. It's, Harry's first line in the sequence they bring Joe and Nikki in, right, is he's on the phone and he says, it can hardly be unique if they can make another copy. And then he's like, I'll call you back. And that's the character in a nutshell. I don't care what it is. I just want to be able to say I have the only one.
Yeah.
That makes sense. The only one that could play with the toys on the shelf. No other kids allowed. I know we're starting to run out of time, so I want to get a couple lightning quick questions. You were bringing it up earlier. The revelation of Booker being the traitor of the group, because
spoiler.
Spoiler, yeah. Because basically, they could heal their physical pain, but not their emotional pain. And that's kind of the concept there. It's tricky as to when to decide how far in you reveal that. I think there's definitely breadcrumbs that people could see when watching it. What were the debates you guys had as to exactly when to reveal it? Or did it always?
I don't remember us ever discussing what the right time was. I think it was always, it has to be at this time. That's the place to do it. Yeah.
I could have seen it broadcast earlier.
Yeah, I would just say the only discussions really, and honestly, internally for me, was how much to highlight those breadcrumbs. Because obviously the worst thing would be for anyone to see it coming. But what you love is when you go back and watch it the second, third, hopefully fourth, fifth time, you start to notice those little tells. And that's the fun part. So it really was, how much do I want to highlight this look on Booker's
Sure.
face, you know? So.
Well, I mean,
it's why the mine scene works so well between Matthias and Kiki, the Booker Niall scene.
And you could see earlier that Copley's going to kind of switch sides as well. Like those breadcrumbs were a bit clearer, but I think on purpose to show that he was, you know, a good
he's
person.
conflicted.
Yes,
Yeah,
he's
conflicted.
Yeah.
You know, I love this movie. I love the reveal at the end with Quinn showing up, and today is July 15th. Oh man, my taxes. But also it's the day that issue 5 of the Old Guard Force Multiplied comes out.
Yeah, last issue.
Finally be able to see what happens. You know, this has been a success. Have you guys started talking about a possible sequel?
I haven't talked to anybody seriously about whether or not there will be one. We had conversations about, well, you do this, and here's an idea, and this is some of what I'm playing with. But nobody has come to me and said, you're doing it.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, it's about, right now it's early, and it really is about the audience. Does the audience want a sequel? And of course, it's been beautiful to see the response.
Yes, please.
I mean, look, I can start writing tomorrow, but I'm not going to do it unless somebody says get to work. So
yes. I hope it happens. You know, I think a good place to wrap things up would be your toughest scene. And for both of you, I'd like to know what the scene was that you sweat about the most, the one that you had to really rise to the creative challenge to solve. So, Gary, I'll start with you. What was your toughest scene to crack in the screenplay? And then, Gina, of course, your toughest scene on set. And how did you rise to the creative challenge?
Oh, man, that is genuinely hard. I will say, I think the thing that I had the biggest trouble with, and I think it's personally to me the best sequence in the movie, which shows that it does pay off, is when in the comic Andy collects Nile in Afghanistan. It's a 2-page montage to get them to Paris. It's just, and now I get them to Paris. And you can't do that in the movie. In the movie, it takes something like 7 to 10 minutes of screen time from Andy arriving to them getting to Goosonville. And that's 3 separate sequences. It's getting to the plane, it's getting on the plane, and then it's the sequence on the plane. And I can't even tell you how many times we went under the hood on those things to get them right.
What seemed to be the problem? Was it the pacing?
No, I mean, it was just that, how do you pick the right questions? How much of the answers can you give? How glib can it be here?
Exposition is the enemy.
Well, and also what's fair to the character? What is a fair question? What is it that Niall absolutely has to ask? What is true here? What is the way to get the turn? What does the turn look like? And I love the movie. I am staggeringly proud of the movie. That plane fight I can watch that on loop forever. I love the fact that Andy, until the fight is over, until Niall has scored 3 good hits on Andy and won't take no for an answer, forces Andy to break an arm and break her leg, right, to get her to stop. It's only then that Andy wants to know her name. Up until that point, she's just kid. And I love all of that. I think it was beautifully executed. I think it's beautifully performed. I take no credit. That to me is like, we did a lot of hard work, but that was all in execution, in my opinion.
You even made that scene a setup and payoff for the final scene where she says, do you speak Russian? Yeah. Gina, what was your toughest scene? What was the scene that you found yourself returning to again and again in pre-production or on set due to a logistic problem where all the good planning went out the window?
Well, that thankfully didn't happen. The scene that kept me up at night of how am I going to do it was a kill floor. The kill floor on the pages, what Leandro drew was so visceral and so badass and so just phenomenal. I really was, how am I going to do this? And that's the thing, on the page you can say a lot, but visually, how am I going to make it believable that our 4 characters with their archaic weapons can defeat 16 mercenaries with modern weaponry. That was the big question. Can I make that believable? So, but it started then going back, what is the story? Who are these characters? And what I came to, and then what was able to impart to our incredible stunt team and fight coordinator, was I felt the old guard have been raised on killing up close and face to face with hand-to-hand combat with the sword and the axe. Like, that's killing up close. Where the modern soldier learns how to kill by shooting targets, yards and yards away. So they don't have that ability in an instant to kill. And that little hesitation when someone's running up on you with an axe, that hesitation is really the superpower that the old guard has. So baking that in allowed us to make the scene work. And I'd say work because people seem to love the scene.
You did an amazing job with the scene, and even the opening shot of Andy's face with kind of that death smile on it, where we hear her voiceover is just great and chilling. But look, you guys have been very generous with your time. I know we're out of time. Congrats on a job well done. I absolutely adored every moment of it, and I hope that there is a sequel. Greg and Gina, congrats. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Jeff, man.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to comics book creator and screenwriter Greg Rucka and director Gina Prince-Bythewood for being so generous with their time and chatting about today's film, The Old Guard. Remember, if you haven't yet seen it, you could watch it on Netflix, and I highly recommend that you do because it's quite a fun flick to watch. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I also hope you check out Backstory Magazine over at www.backstory.net. We are working on issue 42 as an awesome quarantine read. But if you subscribe, you could go through our archive. You could read past issues for about the last year and a half or so. And we're also adding new issues as well. So there's a lot to explore over there. And as a reward for considering subscribing, if you use coupon code SAVE5, that's the word SAVE, the number 5, in checkout, you will save $5 off a subscription. That means that whenever we do publish issue 42, which we're working on now, you'll have instant access to it and whatever else we do for the next physical year that you're a subscriber. So thanks for considering doing that. And if you've never read us before, you could check out our Avengers in-game issue at backstory.net or via the iPad Backstory app. We made it completely free so that you could test drive us, read a full issue, experience all the cool stuff in it, and we hope that means that you're going to want to subscribe. Thanks again for your support or considering supporting us because, honestly, it means everything to us. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2020. All rights reserved. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.